Hi and welcome to my channel. It all began with what seemed like an ordinary day at Penbridge and Hart, the publishing agency where both my wife, Vanessa, and I have worked for the past 2 decades. We met here, fell in love amid deadlines and manuscripts, and built a life together. I'm Ethan, 42 years old, a senior editor specializing in historical nonfiction. Vanessa, also 42, is a charismatic and ambitious literary agent with an eye for discovering the next bestseller. Together, we build a life that many might envy. A cozy townhouse in Beacon Hill, Boston, and a 16-year-old son, Mason, who's bright, curious, and constantly glued to his gaming console. Our work dynamics were separate enough to keep things fresh. Vanessa worked on the 4th floor, among the chaos of author negotiations and client calls. I preferred the quieter 5th floor, where edits and fact-checking ruled the day. We rarely crossed paths at the office except in meetings, and that professional boundary worked well for years. Vanessa's assistant, Riley, was a sharp and efficient 25-year-old who seemed to be Vanessa's second brain, while my intern, Liam, was a grad student whose love for books occasionally outpaced his ability to meet deadlines. Looming above all of us was Gregory Vance, the CEO, a man in his late 40s whose charm could convince even the most hesitant author to sign. Vanessa worked closely with Gregory, often heading late meetings and dinners on his behalf. I never thought much of it. Why would I? But recently, I'd noticed changes in Vanessa. She was coming home later, her explanations about author meetings or last-minute deadlines vague at best. Mason, ever the observant teenager, once joked, "Guess Mom's married to her job now." I laughed it off, but the words lingered. One evening, while I worked late to meet a deadline, I saw Vanessa leaving Gregory's office. Nothing strange about that, except for the way she smoothed her hair and adjusted her blouse, her expression unreadable. I wanted to believe it was all perfectly normal. After all, publishing was a high-pressure industry. The seed of doubt sprouted fully during the annual company gala at the Boston Public Library. It was a dazzling event, filled with industry elites and champagne flutes. Vanessa shone in her crimson dress, effortlessly commanding attention as she laughed and chatted with colleagues. I stayed in the shadows, content to observe. Then I saw Gregory lean in close, his hand resting on Vanessa's waist. It wasn't just the gesture. It was the way she tilted her head toward him, the way her laughter softened. It was a spark I hadn't seen in her eyes for years. That night, I lay awake replaying the scene. Something was off, but I couldn't yet admit it to myself. The unease gnawed at me for days after the gala. I couldn't shake the image of Gregory's hand on Vanessa's waist or the way she looked at him. It wasn't jealousy, not at first. It was confusion. We'd been together for 20 years, and though our marriage had settled into a comfortable routine, I never doubted her love. But now, the thought that there might be more to her late nights and vague excuses was like a pebble in my shoe, small but impossible to ignore. I decided to keep an eye on things without jumping to conclusions. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband turning molehills into mountains. So I started paying attention. The first crack appeared on a Thursday evening. Vanessa had said she'd be working late again, finalizing a deal with one of Gregory's top clients. Mason was in his room, his door shut, the faint sound of gunfire and explosions from his game bleeding into the hallway. I sat at the kitchen table, picking at a microwave dinner, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Riley, Vanessa's assistant. Just wanted to check if Vanessa is okay. She left early today and didn't respond to my messages. I figured maybe she wasn't feeling well. I stared at the text for a long time. She left early? That didn't add up. If she was with a client, why would Riley, a meticulous planner who kept Vanessa's schedule airtight, be out of the loop? Thanks for checking in, I replied. I'm sure she's fine. I'll let her know you're trying to reach her. As I hit send, my mind raced. Was it possible Vanessa had gone somewhere without telling me, or anyone? I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. 2 hours later, she came home. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her cheeks flushed. She looked surprised to see me still awake. Late night? I asked, keeping my voice casual. Yeah, she replied, kicking off her heels. We had to go over a lot of revisions. Gregory's been really pushing this author to tighten the manuscript. Riley messaged me. I said, watching her reaction closely. She said you left early today. Vanessa froze just for a second, a fraction of hesitation most people wouldn't notice. Then she laughed a little too quickly. Oh, that. Yeah, I ran home to grab a file I forgot. I told Riley, but I guess she didn't hear me. Her explanation felt rehearsed, but I nodded anyway, unwilling to press further. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The doubt that had been a whisper was now a roar. The next morning, I made a decision. If there was something going on, I needed to know, and not just for me, for Mason too. I couldn't let this uncertainty fester and poison our family. The following day, I resolved to dig deeper. Confronting Vanessa directly still felt premature. I wasn't ready to accuse her of something so devastating without proof. If I was wrong, I'd risk irreparable damage to our marriage. But if I was right, I needed to be certain. After Vanessa left for work, I checked her phone. She often left it charging on the kitchen counter while she got ready, and today was no different. My hands trembled as I unlocked it using her familiar passcode. Mason's birthday. It felt invasive, wrong, but the doubts clawing at me demanded answers. Most of her texts were mundane. Messages from Riley, authors, and a few friends. But there was a thread from G.V. Gregory Vance. My chest tightened as I scrolled through it. The conversation wasn't explicit, but it was far more personal than I'd expected. G.V., last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about it. Vanessa, same here. You always know how to make me smile. Can't wait for next time. Next time? My pulse raced. The timestamps confirmed my worst fears. Their messages coincided with the nights she claimed to be working late. The text painted a picture that was undeniable. Still, part of me clung to the possibility that I was misinterpreting things, that their relationship was purely professional, and I was reading too much into it. Before I could delve further, Vanessa came downstairs, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. I quickly locked the phone and slid it back onto the counter, feigning casualness as I sipped my coffee. "You're up early," she said, smiling as she poured herself a cup. "Big day at work?" "Something like that," I murmured, avoiding her gaze. As soon as she left, I went into full detective mode. My first move was to check our shared calendar. Vanessa was meticulous about keeping her schedule updated, but there was nothing suspicious listed for the nights in question. Next, I went to her car. We rarely used the glove compartment, but as I popped it open, my heart sank. Inside was a receipt for the Langham Hotel, dated 2 weeks ago, the night of one of her supposed late meetings. It was for dinner and drinks with 2 guests listed. Gregory's name wasn't on it, but I didn't need a neon sign to connect the dots. Still, I wanted more. I needed more. Later that day, I made an appointment with Sam, an old friend from college who ran a private investigation firm. Sam had a no-nonsense approach to everything, and I knew he'd give me the unfiltered truth. Over coffee, I laid it all out, the late nights, the texts, the receipt. "You sure you want to go down this road?" Sam asked, his tone cautious. Sometimes knowing the truth can hurt more than staying in the dark. "I need to know," I said firmly. "For my sake. For Mason's." Sam nodded. "All right then, I'll get started. Give me a couple of days." Those days crawled by. Vanessa seemed oblivious to my internal turmoil, carrying on with her usual charm. She kissed me goodbye in the mornings, laughed over dinner, and asked Mason about school like nothing was wrong. But every glance, every touch, felt hollow, like I was watching a performance meant to keep me from asking questions. Finally, Sam called. "Ethan," he said, his voice grave, "you're going to want to sit down for this." When Sam arrived at the cafe where we'd agreed to meet, his expression told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. He wasn't the type to sugarcoat things, but there was a hesitation in his step, a reluctance I hadn't seen in him before. He slid a manila envelope across the table. "I've got everything you asked for," he said, sitting down. "Photos, locations, timestamps." "It's not good, Ethan." I swallowed hard, staring at the envelope like it was a live grenade. "Just tell me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Sam sighed, leaning forward. "Vanessa's been meeting Gregory Vance at the Langham Hotel. I've got footage of them entering the hotel on 3 different occasions over the past month. Always late at night, always staying for hours. I followed them the last time. They had dinner, went up to a suite, and didn't come out until morning." My stomach lurched. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't. The facts were laid out in front of me, undeniable and damning. I opened the envelope, my hands trembling, and pulled out the photographs. There she was, Vanessa, my wife of 20 years, arm in arm with Gregory as they entered the hotel. In one image, they were kissing in the lobby, her hand resting on his chest as though it were the most natural thing in the world. She didn't even try to hide it. I muttered, my voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and fury. "I'm sorry, man," Sam said. "I know this isn't easy to hear, but at least now you know. You've got options." I couldn't bring myself to respond. My mind raced, replaying every moment over the past few weeks. Every excuse, every laugh, every lie. The Vanessa I thought I knew had been replaced by someone unrecognizable. Sam's voice cut through my haze. "Look, I don't want to push you, but you need to decide what you're going to do next. Do you want to confront her? Talk to a lawyer? This isn't something you can ignore." "I need to think," I said, shoving the photos back into the envelope. "Thanks, Sam. I'll call you if I need anything else." He nodded, his expression one of sympathy. "Take care of yourself, Ethan. And your kid. This kind of thing can mess with you if you let it." I left the cafe and drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. By the time I got home, it was late and Vanessa was already in bed. I stood in the doorway of our room, watching her sleep, her face peaceful and untroubled. How could she act so normal, so unaffected, while everything was falling apart? The next morning, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to explode in anger or lash out impulsively. This wasn't just about me. It was about Mason too. I needed a plan, one that wouldn't destroy him in the crossfire. That evening, I waited for Vanessa to come home, sitting at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me. When she walked through the door, she smiled like nothing was wrong, dropping her bag on the counter. "Hey," she said, leaning in to kiss me. I turned my head away, and she froze, her smile faltering. "Sit down," I said, my tone cold. "We need to talk." Her eyes darted to the envelope, and for the first time in years, I saw fear on her face. Vanessa hesitated, her hand still resting on the counter as if she needed its support. Her face went pale, but she quickly composed herself, forcing a shaky smile. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Sit down," I repeated, my tone leaving no room for debate. She slid into the chair across from me, her eyes darting to the envelope in the middle of the table. "Ethan, you're scaring me. What's going on?" I pushed the envelope toward her. "You tell me." For a moment, she didn't move, her eyes locked on mine as if trying to gauge how much I knew. Then, with trembling fingers, she opened the envelope and pulled out the photographs. Her reaction was instant. Her breath hitched, her shoulders stiffened, and she looked away as if the images were burning her. "Ethan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't." I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't try to explain, justify, or lie your way out of this. I know everything." She closed her eyes, tears pooling but not falling. I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice cracking. "Sorry." I laughed bitterly. "That's all you've got? Sorry? For what, Vanessa? For sneaking around behind my back? For lying to me and Mason? Or for getting caught?" "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice trembling. It just did. "That's not good enough," I said, leaning forward, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You've been meeting him at a hotel. Multiple times. You've been lying to me, to Mason, to everyone. Do you have any idea what this has done to me? To our family?" She finally met my eyes, her face a mixture of shame and desperation. I felt lonely. "Ethan, you've been so distant, so wrapped up in your work. We barely talk anymore, and when we do, it's about Mason or bills or the house. Gregory, he listened to me. He made me feel." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare put this on me. I may not be perfect, but I never betrayed you. I never humiliated you the way you've humiliated me." "I'm not trying to blame you," she said, tears streaming down her face now. "I know what I did was wrong. I hate myself for it. But it's not just about us anymore, Ethan. I don't want to destroy Mason's life." "Oh, now you care about Mason," I shot back. "Were you thinking about him when you were sneaking off to the Langham? When you were letting Gregory?" I stopped, unable to finish the sentence without my voice breaking. "Don't you dare pretend you care about keeping things together now. You destroyed this." Vanessa sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Please, Ethan, let's talk to someone, a counselor, a therapist, anything. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family. Her words hung in the air, but they felt hollow, like a desperate attempt to salvage something she'd already shattered. I stood, unable to sit there any longer. You've already lost me, I said, my voice cold, and I don't know if there's anything left to save. I left her there at the table, her sobs echoing in the quiet house, and went to Mason's room. He looked up from his computer, surprised to see me. Hey, Dad, everything okay? I forced a smile, though my heart felt like it was being crushed. Yeah, buddy. Just wanted to check in. How's schoolwork going? It's fine, he said, giving me a curious look. Are you sure you're okay? You look tired. Au fine ilid. Just a long day. I sat with him for a while, watching him work on a coding project. For those few moments, I pretended everything was normal, that our lives weren't unraveling. But in the back of my mind, I knew the truth. I had to figure out what came next, not just for me, but for Mason too. The morning after the confrontation, the house was thick with tension. Vanessa and I had barely spoken, and when we did, it was clipped and transactional. She tried to approach me in the kitchen before I left for work, but I brushed past her, not ready to deal with more apologies or pleas. Mason, thankfully, remained oblivious to the storm brewing between us, his morning filled with toast and chatter about an upcoming coding competition at school. At the office, I couldn't focus. Every manuscript, every email, every task seemed trivial compared to the swirling mess of my personal life. I tried to bury myself in work, but my thoughts kept circling back to Vanessa's tearful pleas, to her words about feeling lonely. A part of me wanted to believe that we could fix things, for Mason's sake if nothing else. But the other part, the larger part, was filled with anger and betrayal. By lunchtime, I couldn't stand the indecision anymore. I texted Sam, asking him to meet me at the bar we used to frequent during college. If anyone could help me sort through the chaos, it was him. When I arrived, Sam was already there, nursing a glass of whiskey. He waved me over, his expression unreadable. You look like hell, he said as I sat down. Feel worse, I muttered, signaling the bartender for a drink. So, what's the plan? Sam asked, leaning back in his chair. You're not the kind of guy to sit on the sidelines. You've got to decide, fight for the marriage or end it. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I don't know, Sam. She says she wants to fix things, go to counseling, try to make it work. But how am I supposed to trust her again? Every time I think about those pictures, about her and Gregory, I broke off, unable to finish the sentence. Sam took a long sip of his drink, his eyes narrowing. Trust isn't something you can force, Ethan. If you don't think you can rebuild it, then you need to walk away. Otherwise, you're just prolonging the pain. And Mason? I asked. How do I explain this to him? How do I rip his world apart without making him hate her? Or me? Sam nodded slowly, his expression softening. That's the hard part. He's a smart kid, Ethan. He'll figure it out, one way or another. The best thing you can do is be honest with him. Age appropriate, of course. Don't sugarcoat it, but don't throw Vanessa under the bus either. It's going to suck, no matter how you slice it. I stared into my drink, Sam's words sinking in. He was right, but the thought of having that conversation with Mason made my stomach churn. Still, it had to be done. By the time I got home, the house was eerily quiet. Mason was in his room, and Vanessa was sitting on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes red and puffy. Ethan, she began, but I held up a hand. Not now, I said, my voice firm. We'll talk later. Right now, I need to speak to Mason. Her face fell, but she nodded, retreating to the kitchen. I went upstairs, my steps heavy. Mason's door was half open, and I could hear the faint clatter of his keyboard. I knocked lightly before stepping inside. Hey, bud, I said, sitting down on the edge of his bed. Can we talk for a minute? Sure, he said, spinning his chair around to face me. What's up? I took a deep breath, searching for the right words. You know how sometimes things between adults can get complicated? Mason frowned, his brow furrowing. Yeah, I guess. Well, your mom and I are going through something like that right now. We've been having some problems, and there's a chance we might need to make some big changes. Big changes? He echoed, his voice uncertain. Like what? I hesitated, my chest tightening. We might need to live apart for a while. It doesn't mean we don't love you, because we do, more than anything. This is just something between your mom and me. It's not your fault, Okay. He stared at me for a long moment, his face a mix of confusion and fear. Is this about those late nights? I heard you guys arguing yesterday. Did Mom do something? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to shield him from the details, but he was too perceptive for that. Your mom and I have both made mistakes, I said carefully. But the important thing is that we're going to figure out how to move forward as a family, even if things look different. Mason nodded slowly, his eyes shiny with unshed tears. Okay, he said quietly. I don't want us to fall apart. I hugged him tightly, my own emotions threatening to spill over. We'll get through this, Mason. I promise. Downstairs, I could hear Vanessa moving around in the kitchen, the faint sound of glass against marble. I knew the next conversation I'd have with her would define the rest of our lives. Later that evening, as Mason retreated to his room, I found Vanessa still in the kitchen. She stood by the sink, her back to me, staring out the window into the dark yard. A glass of wine sat untouched on the counter beside her. She must have heard me come in, but she didn't turn around. Ethan, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Did you talk to Mason? Yes, I replied, leaning against the doorframe. I told him as much as I could without giving him the whole picture. He knows something's wrong. He's scared, Vanessa. Confused. She turned to face me, tears streaking her face. I'm so sorry for all of this, she said, her voice trembling. I've been selfish. I wasn't thinking about what this could do to you, to Mason. I don't even recognize myself anymore. I crossed my arms, trying to keep my anger in check. Why, Vanessa? That's the one thing I can't wrap my head around. Was it worth it? Was he worth it? Her shoulders sagged, and she wiped at her eyes with trembling hands. I don't know, she admitted, her voice cracking. It wasn't about Gregory. It was about me. I felt invisible, Ethan, like we were just roommates coasting through life. He made me feel seen again, important. But it was a mistake. A horrible, selfish mistake. Her words hung in the air, and I felt my anger mixing with something else, grief maybe. Grief for the life we'd built, the trust we'd had, the love that now felt tainted. You didn't feel seen, I said slowly. But did you ever stop to ask if I felt the same way? Did it ever cross your mind to talk to me instead of running to someone else? She winced as if I'd struck her. You're right, she whispered. I should have. I should have come to you. But I was afraid. I thought maybe you didn't feel the same way anymore, and I didn't want to face that. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. So instead of facing it, you tore us apart anyway. Vanessa stepped closer, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I want to fix this, Ethan. I'll do anything. Counseling, separation, whatever it takes. I just don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for 2 decades, and felt the weight of her words. Did I want to try to fix this? Could I ever trust her again? The thought of living without her was as painful as the betrayal itself. But the anger in my chest was still fresh, still raw. I don't know if this can be fixed, I said finally. I don't even know if I want to try. Her face crumpled, and she took a shaky step back. Ethan, please. I'm not saying it's over. I interrupted, my voice firm. But I need space. I can't breathe in this house right now. I need time to figure out what I want and what's best for Mason. Vanessa nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. Whatever you need, she whispered. I'll give you whatever you need. I think you should stay with your sister for a while. I said, I'll stay here with Mason. He needs stability, and I can't uproot him right now. She flinched but didn't argue. Okay, she said softly. I'll pack some things tonight. As she moved past me toward the stairs, I felt a pang of something. Regret? Sadness? Whatever it wasn't enough to stop her. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the faint sounds of her footsteps overhead, and felt the weight of what was to come pressing down on me. This wasn't the end. Not yet. But the road ahead felt long, uncertain, and unbearably lonely. Vanessa left early the next morning, slipping out quietly while Mason was still asleep. She'd packed a suitcase and left a short note on the kitchen counter that simply read, I'm sorry. Call if you need anything. It was vague, almost mechanical, and it left me feeling hollow. For the first time in 20 years, the house felt truly empty. There was no sound of her bustling around, no smell of her coffee brewing. I stared at the note for a while before crumpling it and tossing it into the trash. I didn't want her apologies in writing. I wanted clarity, answers, something tangible to make sense of what she had done. Mason came downstairs a little after 9, his hair sticking up in a way that reminded me of when he was a toddler. He glanced around the kitchen and frowned. "Where's Mom?" "She's staying with Aunt Riley for a while," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "She and I decided it would be best to take some time apart." His frown deepened. "Time apart? What does that mean? Are you guys getting divorced?" The word hit me like a slap. I wasn't ready to confront that possibility. Not yet. "No," I said quickly. "It just means we need to figure some things out. We're still a family, Mason. That hasn't changed." He nodded, but the worry in his eyes didn't fade. "Okay," he said quietly. "I guess I'll just be in my room." I watched him retreat upstairs, my heart heavy. This wasn't the kind of life I'd wanted for him, for any of us. The rest of the day was a blur. I tried to work to distract myself, but my thoughts kept circling back to Vanessa. I replayed our last conversation over and over, dissecting every word, every tear. Was she truly sorry? Or was this just damage control? And could I ever forgive her? Even if she was? Around mid-afternoon, Sam called. "Mun, just checking in. How are you holding up?" "Barely," I admitted. "Vanessa moved out this morning. Mason knows something's wrong, but I'm trying to keep it together for his sake." "You doing okay with that?" Sam asked. "Keeping it together?" "Not really," I said with a bitter laugh. "I feel like I'm on autopilot. I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to do next." "Look," Sam said, his tone serious. "I know you're in the thick of it right now, but you need to start thinking long-term. This isn't just about whether or not you stay married. You got to protect yourself and Mason, especially if things get messy." "Messy how?" I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling I knew the answer. "Finances, custody, stuff like that," Sam said. "I hate to bring it up, but if this thing with Gregory blows up, it could complicate everything. You need to be prepared." The thought of dealing with lawyers and custody agreements made my stomach churn, but I knew Sam was right. "I'll think about it," I said. "Thanks, Sam." "Anytime," he said. "And hey, don't hesitate to call if you need someone to vent to. You're not in this alone." After we hung up, I sat in the living room, staring at the framed photos on the mantel. There was one of the three of us from a beach trip years ago, Vanessa laughing, Mason grinning with his gap-toothed smile, and me with my arm around them both. We looked happy, carefree. It felt like another lifetime. By the time Mason came down for dinner, I'd made up my mind. I had to start taking control of the situation, for his sake and mine. "Mason," I said as we sat down to eat, "I know things are tough right now, and I'm sorry for that. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here for you. We're going to get through this." He nodded, poking at his food with his fork. "I know, Dad. I hope things go back to normal." "So do I, bud," I said, forcing a smile. "So do I." But as I cleared the plates and Mason headed back upstairs, I knew deep down that normal was gone. The only question left was what would come next. It was just past 10 p.m. when the call came. Mason had gone to bed early after a particularly quiet dinner, and I was sitting on the couch, mindlessly flipping through channels. My phone buzzed, and I grabbed it, expecting a spam call or maybe Sam checking in. Instead, it was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello," I answered, a pit forming in my stomach. "Is this Ethan?" A woman's voice asked, professional but tinged with urgency. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Nurse Daniels from Boston General. Your wife, Vanessa, has been in a car accident. She's stable, but we need you to come to the hospital." For a moment, I couldn't process the words. "A car accident?" I finally managed. "Is she? How bad is it?" "She's conscious, but she sustained some injuries. I don't have all the details, but you should come down right away." "I'm on my way," I said, already grabbing my coat and keys. I rushed upstairs and knocked on Mason's door. When he opened it, groggy and confused, I kept my tone as calm as possible. "Your mom's been in an accident. I'm going to the hospital. Stay here, okay? I'll call you as soon as I know more." His eyes widened, fear flickering across his face. "Is she okay?" "She's stable," I said, trying to reassure him. "Get some sleep, Mason. I'll keep you updated." The drive to the hospital felt endless. My thoughts raced. What happened? Was she drunk? Distracted? Was Gregory with her? That last thought made my grip on the steering wheel tighten until my knuckles turned white. I hated myself for thinking it, but I couldn't help it. When I arrived, the ER was a chaotic symphony of fluorescent lights and hurried footsteps. A nurse directed me to Vanessa's room, and as I approached, my heart thudded painfully in my chest. I stopped just short of the door when I heard a voice I wasn't expecting. "Vanessa, I was so worried," a man said, his tone soft but unmistakable. "Gregory." I stepped into the room, and the air grew heavy. Vanessa was lying in the hospital bed, her face pale, a bandage over her forehead. Gregory sat beside her, holding her hand, his head snapping up the moment I entered. His face registered shock and discomfort, but Vanessa's was worse. Guilt plain as day. "What the hell is he doing here?" I demanded, my voice low but seething with anger. "Ethan," Vanessa started, her voice weak. "It's not. You don't get to explain," I snapped, cutting her off. "Not now. Not after this." Gregory stood, his hands raised as if to calm the situation. "I came because I care about her. This isn't the time to. Get out." I barked, my voice loud enough to draw a glance from a nurse passing by. "You don't belong here." Gregory hesitated, glancing at Vanessa as if waiting for her permission to stay. She didn't say a word, just closed her eyes and turned her face away. Smart choice, I thought bitterly. After a long pause, Gregory grabbed his coat and left without another word, the tension in the room following him out like a storm cloud. I turned back to Vanessa, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "How dare you?" I said, my voice trembling. "How dare you let him be the one sitting here with you when they called me your husband?" She opened her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't call him, Ethan. He just showed up. And why would he think he has the right to do that?" I shot back. "Because you gave him that right, Vanessa. You let him into our lives, into our marriage. And now, even here, after everything, he gets to sit by your side?" She sobbed quietly, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything. Sorry doesn't fix this," I said, my voice cold. "You've wrecked everything, Vanessa. And now you're in a hospital bed because of the choices you made." I took a deep breath, stepping back toward the door. "Mason's at home. He's worried about you. When you're released, you can go to Riley's. Don't come back to the house." "Ethan," she called out weakly, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My anger, my heartbreak, my exhaustion, it was all too much. As I walked out of the hospital, I saw Gregory standing near the entrance, pacing. He looked up as I approached, his expression wary. I stopped just short of him, staring him down. "If you ever show up in my life again, I swear to God, Gregory, you'll regret it," I said, my voice icy. "Stay away from my wife. Stay away from my son. You've done enough damage." Without waiting for a response, I walked past him and into the cold night air, the weight of the evening pressing down on me like a collapsing ceiling. The night after the hospital visit was restless. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as the events played over and over in my head. Gregory's presence, Vanessa's tearful apology, the cold, sterile atmosphere of that hospital room. It all left a bitter taste in my mouth. For hours, I wrestled with my emotions. Anger, betrayal, grief. The woman I'd shared my life with for 2 decades was now someone I barely recognized. The next morning, Mason came downstairs looking apprehensive. I'd promised him updates, but after the way things unfolded at the hospital, I hadn't been able to bring myself to say much. "Dad," he began tentatively, "how's Mom?" "She's okay," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "She's staying with Aunt Riley for now to recover." He nodded but didn't look relieved. "What happened? I mean, with the accident?" I hesitated. I wanted to shield him from the messy details, but he deserved some truth. "She was driving late at night, probably tired or distracted, and lost control of the car. She's lucky it wasn't worse." Mason looked down at his cereal, stirring it absent-mindedly. "Is this because of everything else? The stuff going on with you too?" This question hit me like a gut punch. Mason wasn't a little kid anymore. He was old enough to sense that there was more to the story. "Things are complicated right now," I said carefully. "But I want you to know that no matter what happens, both your mom and I love you. That hasn't changed." He nodded slowly, though I could see the worry in his eyes. I wanted to say more, to somehow reassure him, but the words wouldn't come. After he left for school, I sat at the kitchen table, staring into my coffee. I knew I couldn't avoid Vanessa forever. There were too many loose ends, too many unanswered questions. But I also knew I couldn't face her alone, not while I was still this angry. I needed clarity before I decided my next move. That afternoon, I called Vanessa's sister, Riley to check in. She's here, Riley said when she answered. She's been quiet, mostly resting. What do you want me to tell her? Tell her nothing, I replied. I just needed to know she's safe. I'll reach out when I'm ready. Riley hesitated. Ethan, I'm not taking sides, but she's devastated. I've never seen her like this. She made her choices. I said, the bitterness creeping into my voice. I'm dealing with the fallout. I understand, Riley said softly. Just let me know if you need anything. The confrontation I was avoiding came sooner than I expected. That evening, Vanessa called. I stared at my phone for a long moment before answering. Ethan, she said, her voice still weak. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but we need to talk. I stayed silent, letting her fill the awkward pause. I don't know where to start, she continued. I'm so sorry for everything. For the lies, the hurt, the way I've treated you. I know I can't take it back, but I need you to know that it wasn't about you. It wasn't about Mason. It was about me, about how lost I felt. You didn't feel lost when Gregory showed up at the hospital. I said, my anger simmering just below the surface. You didn't feel lost when you let him sit by your side like you belonged there. Her breath hitched, and I could hear the tears in her voice. I didn't ask him to come. I didn't even tell him about the accident. He must have found out from someone at work. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course. Gregory, always so concerned, always ready to play the savior. Please, Ethan, she pleaded. Let me explain. Let me make this right. You can't make this right. I snapped. Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our family. You made me question everything we've built. I know, she whispered, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to fix it if you'll let me. But you're not just punishing me, Ethan. Mason is hurting too. Her words struck a nerve, and for a moment, I felt the weight of it all crushing down on me. Mason, my son, the one person I was trying to protect in all of this. I don't know what the future holds, Vanessa. I said finally, my voice steadier now. But right now, I need space. I need time to figure out what's best for Mason and me. There was a long silence before she spoke again. I'll respect that, she said softly. But please, don't shut me out completely. For Mason's sake. The call ended, leaving me drained and no closer to a resolution. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that the road ahead would be far messier than I'd anticipated. The pieces of our broken marriage were scattered everywhere, and I wasn't sure if they could ever be put back together. The days following Vanessa's phone call blurred into a mix of quiet routine and simmering tension. At home, Mason and I settled into an uneasy rhythm. He didn't ask many questions, but his lingering looks spoke volumes. Every so often, I'd catch him staring at Vanessa's empty seat at the dinner table, the silence between us too loud to ignore. By the 5th day, Vanessa texted me, asking if she could see Mason. She didn't press for details about us, just a short, simple plea. Vanessa, can I come by to see Mason tomorrow? I miss him. I debated ignoring it, but Mason deserved to see his mom. No matter what was happening between us, she was still his mother. Me, come by at 5. Just you. The next evening, she arrived right on time. I heard her car pull into the driveway and stood in the kitchen, bracing myself. Mason beat me to the door, throwing it open before I could intervene. Mom, he exclaimed, relief washing over his face as he hugged her tightly. She knelt to his level, burying her face in his shoulder, her hands trembling as she held him. I missed you so much, she whispered, her voice breaking. I missed you too, Mason replied, stepping back to look at her. Are you okay now? Dad said you're staying at Aunt Riley's. She glanced at me briefly before answering. I'm doing better, sweetie. I just needed some time to rest and think. Mason hesitated, his brow furrowed. Are you and Dad going to, fix things? Vanessa's smile faltered, and I stepped in, placing a hand on Mason's shoulder. We're working on it, I said, keeping my voice calm. It's going to take time, but no matter what, we're both here for you. Vanessa gave me a grateful look, but I avoided her gaze, focusing instead on Mason. The evening passed uneventfully. Vanessa stayed for dinner, the three of us sitting around the table like old times. Mason was the one holding the conversation together, chattering about his coding competition and a new project he was excited about. I played along, nodding and smiling, but Vanessa was quieter than usual, her fork barely moving. After dinner, Mason retreated upstairs, leaving us alone in the kitchen. Vanessa began clearing the plates, but I stopped her. You don't have to do that, I said flatly. She froze, then set the plate down and turned to face me. Ethan, thank you for letting me see him. I know it's been hard on him. It's not just hard on him, I said, my tone sharp. This whole situation is a mess, Vanessa, and you created it. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to fix what I can, for Mason, if nothing else. Her words lingered, heavy and unresolved. I'm not ready to talk about us, I said finally, but Mason needs stability, and he deserves to have his mom in his life. We'll figure out a way to make that happen. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of hope and sorrow. Thank you, she whispered. As she left that night, I watched her car disappear down the street, a strange mix of emotions swirling in my chest. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hope that things could be repaired. But the larger part of me knew that trust wasn't something easily rebuilt. I wanted to check on Mason, finding him sitting on his bed, scrolling on his phone. He looked up as I walked in. Is Mom coming back soon? He asked. She'll visit again, I said. But for now, she's staying with Aunt Riley. He nodded, his expression unreadable. I just want things to go back to normal. So do I, bud, I said softly, ruffling his hair. But sometimes normal isn't the same as it used to be. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the empty spot beside me, the ache of loneliness creeping in. This wasn't how I envisioned our life together. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the road to forgiveness, if it even existed, would be a long, uncertain one. The weeks following Vanessa's visit settled into a tenuous rhythm. She came by twice a week to see Mason, and our interactions remained cordial but distant. Mason seemed to find some comfort in the arrangement, though his lingering hope for normal weighed on me every time I saw it in his eyes. For me, normal was long gone. Late at night, I wrestled with the question I'd been avoiding. Could I ever forgive Vanessa? Her betrayal was a scar, deep and raw, and no amount of regret on her part could erase what she'd done. And then there was Gregory, an ever-present specter in the shadows of my thoughts. Knowing he'd been part of our lives, part of her life, made the wound sting even more. One Friday, Mason had gone to a friend's house, leaving me alone in the quiet house. I was cleaning the kitchen when my phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. Vanessa, can we talk? Not about Mason, about us. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Me, come by tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. I didn't know what I was hoping to hear, or if I even wanted to hear anything. But avoiding the conversation forever wasn't an option. The next morning, Vanessa arrived promptly at 10. She looked different, subdued, almost timid, as if she knew how much was at stake. I motioned for her to sit in the living room, keeping my distance as I leaned against the mantel. She took a deep breath before speaking. Ethan, I've thought about this conversation 1,000 times, and I know there's nothing I can say to make what I did okay. I broke your trust. I hurt you. I hurt Mason, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. I stayed silent, my arms crossed, waiting. I let myself believe that Gregory was some kind of escape from the emptiness I was feeling, she continued. But he wasn't. It wasn't real. It was a selfish, stupid mistake that I'll never forgive myself for. Her voice broke, and she wiped at her eyes. But you're real, Ethan. What we had, it was real, and I want to fight for it, even if I don't deserve the chance. Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. I uncrossed my arms, pacing to the window. You're right about one thing. You don't deserve it, I said, my voice cold but controlled. You shattered everything we built, Vanessa. Everything. I know, she whispered, but I also know that I love you. And if there's any part of you that still loves me, even a little, I'm begging you to let me prove that I can be better. For you. For Mason. I turned to face her, my anger clashing with the faint spark of hope in her eyes. How do I know you won't do this again? How do I trust someone who lied to my face for months? You don't, she admitted. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild that trust. Counseling, transparency, anything. Her honesty disarmed me. For a moment, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, the woman I'd built a life with. But the weight of her betrayal still loomed large. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, my voice cracking. I don't know if I even want to try. Tears streamed down her face, but she nodded. I understand. Just promise me you'll think about it. For Mason's sake, if nothing else. Over the next few weeks, I thought about her words constantly. I watched her with Mason during her visits, saw how hard she was trying to make things right with him. And though the anger still burned, it began to wane, replaced by something else, something softer. One night, after Mason had gone to bed, I sat down and wrote a list. On one side, the reasons to try again. Mason, our history, the life we built. On the other, the reasons to let go, the betrayal, the pain, the lingering presence of Gregory. The list didn't give me the answer, but it made one thing clear. Whatever decision I made, it had to be for me, not out of obligation or guilt. A month later, Vanessa and I sat across from each other in a counselor's office, the first step in what would either be our salvation or our swan song. It wasn't easy. The sessions dredged up every painful detail, every resentment, every unspoken fear. Some days I wanted to walk out and never look back. But I stayed, for Mason, for myself, for the chance, however slim, that we could find our way back. In the end, it wasn't a grand moment of forgiveness that changed things. It was the small steps, the way Vanessa owned her mistakes, the way she let me set the pace, the way she proved, day by day, that she was willing to do the hard work. Trust didn't return overnight, and maybe it never would completely. But slowly, I began to see a path forward. 6 months later, we stood in the kitchen together, making dinner as Mason rattled off a story about his latest coding project. The scar of her betrayal hadn't disappeared, but it had faded, leaving behind something raw but healing. We weren't the same people we'd been before the affair, but maybe that was okay. What mattered now was that we were trying, not for the life we'd lost, but for the one we still had the chance to build. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow. Goodbye.